miss her. So, did you guys get a chance to read each other's response papers? Did that work out this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you read the response papers? We phrased it a different way.
Yeah.
Well, the papers are complete, but I did not. I'm actually in the process of putting together my thesis too, so I've been I've been going fast, so I did not read the papers. I'm sorry, guys. I am sure they're wonderful, but I apologize. I did not read them.
Okay. So, obviously the class this week is on citizen diplomacy, which I think is a really cool topic. It's not, like, international development is a field that you could get a master's degree in, you could do a PhD in, you could become an economist in international development. Citizen diplomacy is a much more, it's sort of like a way of life. It's being a practitioner in something but not being a professional. There aren't really professional citizen diplomats. It's something that you integrate into what it is that you're already doing if you're a teacher overseas or a tourist or volunteer like you guys. And so it's a different kind of set of tools. It's a practical field, but it also has its own importance and historical background. So I put an agenda in the chat box, and I'd like to try to go through those 5 points and talk about them with you in a discussion fashion, and then at the end of our time together, just answer any questions you have about fulfilling the remaining requirements for the class. Why don't we start off, though, by defining citizen diplomacy. How is it that citizen diplomacy, first of all, what is it? And then the second question that is going to be is, how is it different than what people do at embassies when they're not at the 4th of July parties?
Okay, so in my opinion, citizen diplomacy is when, like, a citizen or a native of a country goes to another country and has the responsibility of representing their country. So whether they choose to show their country in a good image, a bad image, but it's their responsibility to show their country in a good image. So what's the next question? Oh, how is it different from the actual office duties? So the actual diplomats are very very diplomatic, but then I know.
You can't use the term in the sentence to define it.
I was looking for another word, couldn't find it. They're very
Politically correct?
Yeah, politically correct, very prim and proper, everything very bureaucratic. But then with a citizen diplomat, it's very informal, and it's just like your responsibility, and no one is looking over your shoulder, unlike the other diplomats. But then you have the sole responsibility to represent your country in a good image.
I think there's a lot of good stuff there. What are other contributions to either defining citizen diplomacy or differentiating citizen diplomacy from practices that happen in an embassy?
I think that citizen diplomacy just happens whenever you have, two people together that don't come from the same place, and they engage in any kind of meaningful discussion about their respective cultures, and it's not for the purpose of resolving some kind of issue. Like, I know that when I talk to my students about their views of America and their life here and vice versa, that we're not going to be solving any of the problems that may exist in our international relations, but it goes more towards improving people's understanding of one another, I guess, at the base level, which can build up to creating more of a desire among the people to understand other countries and other cultures better, which can influences the way that our governments approach one another, but it doesn't immediately solve any issues.
Okay, good. What about any thoughts from Tajikistan?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference in answering both of those questions is that citizen diplomacy is informal and actual diplomacy is formal. So one has training, one is acknowledged, one you choose to do, and the other, sometimes people don't know that they have that choice. They don't really realize that they're in a situation that would require any citizen diplomacy, but it's just as important because those are the impressions that people will have of your country, whether it is informal or not. And sometimes I feel like that impacts people more when they know that people may or may not be on their guard, when they're not thinking about it necessarily, when it's not their profession, it's not their job. But yeah, so citizen diplomacy is the informal aspect, and diplomacy is the formal.
So there's an aspect that anyone can do citizen diplomacy.
Yeah.
It's important to that definition.
Exactly.
Okay. Have you guys, in your conversations with Tajiks and Moroccans, have you heard people say to you or talk about the difference between the American people and the U.S. government, or U.S. foreign policy versus the American people?
A little bit.
Okay, so there's this refrain that has been out there for a while in terms of in the countries where you guys are volunteering, they don't select their political leaders. There might be elections, but they don't feel ownership over wanting their. Hey, Sammy, welcome.
Hi.
We just started talking about what is citizen diplomacy, and we have a whole little agenda that we're going through. So we were just talking about this distinction that people draw between people and government. And so in countries in the Middle East and Central Asia, North Africa, there's very few places where people elect those who truly they feel as if they represent them. And so there's like this thing where they draw a distinction of, if I'm Egyptian, I would hate to be judged based upon what your views are of El-Sisi or Mubarak before him, that this is our government, and then we have the Egyptian people, and judge us based upon what we do as people. And so for a long period of time, people would project that outwards, and they would say, we're not going to judge the American people based upon the policies enacted, like the drone policy or decision to invade Iraq or to not help Syrian refugees, because we don't freely elect our leaders, and so we don't naturally assume that you elect yours. And so there's this dichotomy there because it's something that people really respect about the American people in terms of our political institutions and free elections and whatnot. So it doesn't quite make sense, but it's this thing that has existed for a long period of time, and it's one of the reasons why you guys are so well received as representatives of the American people, and you're not responsible for representing positions of the U.S. government. And so that's led to these openings for citizen diplomats, in my opinion, throughout the Muslim world in particular, is because of this idea that there is this separation between people and policies. Now getting to what's the difference between a citizen diplomat and a professional diplomat, I think that you guys really spoke well to that in terms of the different answer that you cobbled together. I break it down in terms of there's two main areas of this, and one is message and the other is audience. And Rafi was struggling to find the right word to describe this with message, in that as a citizen diplomat, you guys are free to say whatever you want. I mean, you probably aren't going to be an effective citizen diplomat if you're rude to people and are flippant in terms of what it is that you say, so you wouldn't say anything that you want, but you're under no obligation to carry the message of the U.S. government in this case. That if you disagree, a couple of you guys wrote about guns in your reflection pieces. If taking it to a foreign policy perspective, if you're thinking about U.S. position on international trade deals or on putting ground troops in Syria, if you're for that or against that, you don't have to defend those positions. You can say exactly whatever it is that you want and what your opinion, no matter whether it's an informed opinion or not, on these topics. But someone working in an embassy, a professional diplomat or a ambassador rather than an unofficial ambassador, they have no choice. They have a message that they have to deliver in their meetings with their counterparts, and even in the field of public diplomacy, which is a little similar to citizen diplomacy, but different in that that is diplomats engaging with the general public rather than engaging with other diplomats. If the embassy is hosting a concert and they're bringing an American music group to perform for a crowd in Dushanbe or in Rabat, then they have to still carry the U.S. government line in whatever introductory remarks that they make to that crowd of the American people. They have no choice on the message that they can deliver. So the second piece of this is the audience. And by and large, even though there's been great advances in public diplomacy over the last 10 or 15 years where it's actually you now have diplomats' jobs to go and engage with the public in different places in these different countries, 90% of the work that diplomats do is engaging with their counterparts in their host government and talking about environmental accords or refugee issues or various international regimes that would control the trafficking of conflict minerals. So the people they're talking with, they're typically of a they're of a professional nature, and that they're also in their diplomatic corps. They're not going out to community centers like the Azu Center or the communities like in Imozir where Greenside is working, or the folks who come to the Bashir Center for different language classes. They're never going to most likely have any engagement with a professional diplomat. But by nature of the work that you guys are doing, they're engaging with citizen diplomats, and they're having various cross-cultural interactions about an infinite number of different issues. So I think that leads to an important question of why is this important? There's this whole historical background, and I think that the first reading that I gave you guys is fun. It's so old, I mean, like it was published in 1995, and the historical background on it is that this is a field that came of age or was born during the Cold War, and this idea that governments of a certain kind were not going to be speaking to each other, and there was this role that citizens could play in speaking with each other to improve relations and improve understanding between different peoples. And so, like, I think it's funny every time I reread that reading and they're talking about going to the public library to get, I mean, that's a pre-internet reading in terms of where do you find resources to be a good citizen. And that whole book, it has answers to all those questions that I gave you about, well, if you read this, then you'll be able to deliver a strong answer on gun control. And that's so dated, like, from our day and age where so many people have opinions and there's so much out there on the internet that you can get. But coming back to where we are today, why is citizen diplomacy important? Like, what are the gaps that it can fill in this day and age with our current events, in particular relations between America and these various different countries in the Muslim world? Why is what you're doing and why is citizen diplomacy in general important? Sammy.
I think it's important because it brings people back down to the local level. Because, I mean, like you were talking about with, like, professional diplomats, they're not at the community centers. They're not with, like, the real people. They're, schmoozing others, and that's how politics is. But, like, you keep, like, humanitarian rights and movements, they keep going with the local level, and so it's really important that, like, people like us are here learning and, like, being together with others at a local level. So, and it's just, like, something that, like, professionals just don't get the chance to do.
So along those lines, all of you, in some aspect of your internships, are involved in direct engagement with the public. How many of you have been in a situation where the majority of the people that you're teaching or working with have American friends or have met an American before?
Right? Yeah. Yeah. I think at Azure, previous volunteers, because they always tell us about them. So,
Yeah. And I think that's been like the crux of their involvement with Americans is like the other unofficial ambassadors who've been here before. Because I think all the kids at Al Akhwain, for the most part, know a lot of Americans because Americans are always there. But the people in Azru, I think like we are their main source of contact with Americans.
Kenneth, what about you?
I would say that they actually have none based on what they tell me and based on my impressions, based on like their impressions of like this cross-cultural interaction. Because a lot of the times when I'm teaching these people, these students, that they'll ask me, well, you actually pronounce this way, and what I tell them is that what I'm giving you is not a standardized version of a dialect or of a language. I'm giving you what I perceive to be the most common form of that language that you can help yourself be understood with. And with that, they don't necessarily they don't they seem to they seem to doubt me when I say that, because again, they don't have that frequent interaction that would allow them to see, well, maybe this is that common version of the language. Instead, what they have is their own accents of the English language that they understand each other with. So every time that I pronounce something, they doubt me every time because they're so used to the accented version that they find to be standard, because most of their teachers are teaching with accents, or at least Tajik or Russian accents. So I think that a lot of the time they're not, their impressions aren't misinformed. It's just that their impressions are lacking consolidation and development as well.
That's interesting. And Sammy, what about you? The folks that you're doing the English class with, are you a novelty to them?
No, I don't. Some of them, yes. Some of them, not so much. Some of them have I was talking to some of them earlier today, and they actually go to school in Fez, and so they've probably had more experience with like Americans there. And then there's some of the younger children, they've never met an American before, and so it's like all entirely new to them. But like I'd say it's very much a bag of Skittles where I'm at. So.
Bag of Skittles. What does that mean? So, okay, so taking a mixed answer in terms of some of you guys are setting the mold for which all Americans will be judged against in a good way or bad way, and others are part of a continuum. But going back to this question of why is this important, think about our current events now, and particularly if you look at the history of the countries where you guys are serving and the surrounding areas. You're looking at decades of top-down rule where the consent of the people is assumed in the actions of their presidents and their leaders. Thinking about authoritarianly ruled places where for years people have had a lack of access to information, and where leadership is able to just take for granted that I'm going to make a decision, and because of security apparatus, lack of information, etc., that decision will trickle down through the society and we will be able to implement it. That's changed entirely with the internet, and now you can't control information in that same way. And so before, when you had all this whitewash that was coming out of government outlets and newspapers, that this is what people had to think about in terms of what you're thinking about Americans or Russians or Arabs, whatever the case may be, now you have so much, it's the exact opposite issue. You have such a proliferation of other information that's out there that it's almost like an opposite kind of problem, where if you guys were citizen diplomats in the 80s or the 90s, then you would be breaking that mold from the perspective of what the government has put out as this is what an American is. As your citizen diplomats today, you are entering into a totally muddled picture of like who are these Americans? Like I think all these things about them based upon what I see on TV, what I read on the internet, and I don't have anything to measure it up against in real life, or I have a limited sample. And so even though there's so much more information out there than there was before, it's just, you know, only some of it is accurate. All of it comes from different angles. And any time that you can hold up a real-life, complicated human being as evidence of this is a person from this country, and oh my gosh, they have a diversity of viewpoints, they don't all think the same way, then it underscores that key aspect of any exchange of citizen diplomacy, is that stereotypes don't work. We have more in common, most likely, than we do have separate, and here's living, breathing proof, you know, of that point. Does that make sense in terms of the spectrum of having no information to having could potentially too much information? Yes? No?
Can you explain it again?
Yeah. So if I asked you why citizen diplomacy was important during the Cold War, then you would have an army of various returned Peace Corps volunteers, other international travelers who would say that, you know, they've traveled to parts of Africa, parts of Central Asia, not Central Asia because there was no Peace Corps then, but that because of the lack of information, of credible information that was out there about who we are as people, then every time you have an interaction with a living, breathing person from that country, it's like your mind is opened up to the fact of, oh, things are really different than what I had assumed they were based upon the propaganda that I was reading, or what I had heard second, third, fourth, fifth hand from people, because I've never actually had the chance to engage with people from this country. That was in the, you know, in the Cold War period and shortly thereafter. Now, if you look at the time period we're in today, and you look at all the information that's out there on the internet, it's the exact opposite problem. Because rather than there being no information that was accurate, there's too much information. You can go to any website, you can read anybody's blog, you can go and look at their Facebook page, you can conclude, in the case of Americans, that we have no morals, that we shoot people up, that we're oversexed, or you could conclude that we are the most conservative, you know, Christian right-wing country that's out there, and that, you know, our morals are such that our views like on abortion are such that, you know, we consider a fetus to be a human being. You could draw any number of possible conclusions from just the glut of information that's out there. So when you meet like a Sammy, a Kenneth, a Julia, then you're forced to evaluate all that information versus this living, breathing human being that's shown up at my doorstep. And the conclusion is the same, hopefully, whether you're operating from a period of 30 years ago where there was no information, or of today where there's too much information. That when we meet each other in the flesh, we see the complexities of it all. That not everybody is the same. That not all Americans share the same viewpoints. That we have these things that are in common as human beings that transcend our nationality, our religion, or where other ways in which we come from, our ethnicity, whatever the case may be. And so this value of citizen diplomacy is bringing everyday people and their human frailties or foibles to the doorstep and saying, look, we have this common ground, we can learn from each other, and we're actually different than what you see on the internet, what you see on TV, etc. Does that make more sense now? Yeah. Okay. And so the beauty of citizen diplomacy in this regard is that it can be infinite. We'll never run out of people to touch. That there will always be pockets of people that either have no interaction with real live Americans in our case, or that have way too much information that they think is actionable information, but is really not grounded in any sort of first-person experience reality.
And I think that's a good point. But part of the complication of this is that there's an imbalance in, like you said, there's an overproduction of information, of everything, of propaganda that's out there, but so much of that is actually produced by Western nations. So you have this influx of information, but it's coming directly from the Western nations that propagate it. So yes, the in-person to person contact, it's good and it's idealistic and it does help things, but structurally a lot of the misinformation is our fault. And structurally, if you're looking at the politics, when you say in citizen diplomacy you have this nice absence of, well, we don't want to be judged for our government, so we won't judge you for theirs, I think that's not entirely true, because we're used as the example of freedom and in actually choosing our representatives. Like that's what we're known for. So the fact that, especially right now, and especially if you're in Near East and Middle Eastern relations, the fact that things are such a mess right now really reflects it makes the work of citizen diplomacy so much less nonchalant than it would have been in the past. Because in the past,
What do
there's
you mean by
a
nonchalant? Can you clarify that? The nonchalant, please?
well, you can't be in the past, maybe in a Cold War context, you could step out of that because, yes, you have your governments that are clashing, but the rest, you can maybe step aside. With this context now, it's a direct, you do have freedoms, and many people are enacting them in ways that are completely, I mean, they're being enacted, but it's, if you're in Middle Eastern relations and Near Eastern relations or anything dealing with Muslim nations, the way our politics right now do not reflect very positively on the individual direction of our national politics. And that's something that does reflect on individuals, because whether or not that is their opinion, just because, and you'll get a lot of questions about this, because it's your choice. We actually do have control over our governments where they don't necessarily. So I agree with you that it is definitely a much more complicated situation now than before. But it's difficult. It's tricky.
Well, so there's a number. Actually, does anybody else want to respond to that before?
Sorry, it kind of bopped around a lot, so it wasn't as organized as it could have been.
No, very good points. But in the nature of discussion, anybody else want to? I don't want to hog the conversation. So, Rafi and Amber, I don't think you've heard most of that, but Sammy, Kenneth, is there anything you want to respond to now?
Yeah.
I guess in terms of maybe, how do I say, differentiating between legitimate information and avoiding misinformation, I would say that a lot of the times there's like a third kind of a third piece of that chart where of disinterested nation bodies, where especially, or at least from what I can see and in my experience here, some of the time people just are more concerned of what is going on within their own countries, that they don't necessarily pay much attention to the stereotypes or to the, let's say, bombastic images of other countries via their media sources or networks. So while let's say the U.S. as an example does perpetuate itself within a certain realm and with a certain image, there are the countries that do pay more attention to that and some that don't, based on the level of international participation that they actually have for themselves. So while I do think that there are um, while I do think that there are pressures to understand and try to ameliorate uh, international image, with the U.S. I definitely think that there are other nations that are coping, or at least, um, let's say, dealing with their own internal struggles and kind of seeing the U.S. as like a background body of information, as more of a how to put it, as more of like a, not gossipy, but as more of just like an extra, maybe even superfluous information source than what's going on in their own countries. Because a lot of people here, for the most part, from what I've heard and from what they tell me in these classes, is that they want to get out. A lot of the people that I teach in these classes want to be interpreters because they want to travel, and they're not even really concerned about what the U.S. is doing, but about where they can travel in the U.S. and how they can better themselves. And it's more of an individualistic focus than it is of an international platform.
Yeah. It's an important point about this, or the individual motivations, and that goes all the way around the board, not just the people on the receiving end of these exchanges, but like, what are your motivations as a citizen diplomat? What are you representing? How can we ask you to speak for our whole country? Because and that's one of the reasons in your pre-departure that we talk about what is it that you want to talk about, and what is it that you want to avoid, and who is it that you want to represent. Did anybody, Sammy or Amber, Rafi, did you guys want to chime in on this? Julian, so let me come back to one of the points that you made. There was a couple of things in there that were striking to me, but just in nature of time,
Yeah.
I'll pick one of them. The election of Obama is a watershed moment in this conflict of people versus government and perceptions of Americans. In that, prior to the election of Obama, and you got to keep in mind that we're speaking in a lot of generalities here, and this all gets boiled down to individual basis at a certain point. But so many people subscribe to conspiracy theories that were reflected in their own societies of, you have this group of wealthy white men that are basically ruling the United States. And that it's like these families from where, and the strata of society from where presidents come from, and while the American people feel as if they're quite free, and there's aspects on a relative basis of American people being quite free in compared to, let's say Egypt or Tajikistan or Morocco, whatever the case may be. In actuality, you American people, you're not as free as you think you are. But we really appreciate and like the things that you stand for. You're generally sincere, you're honest, you come up with cool innovations, you had a civil rights movement, and I'm fascinated by, in your discussion papers, a number of you talked about race and considering America a racist place, because in a lot of these discussions of this pre-Obama period, America gets a lot of credit for being more equal than other places, but not being perfect in absolute terms. Post-Obama, it's sort of like the American people broke through, and the American people decided they were going to elect an African American who truly is an African American, someone who is first generation, whose father came from a developing country in Africa. And for the argument that U.S. policy is one thing, the American people is another thing, it doesn't hold the same kind of water that it used to. And I think that's a very interesting development to chart going forward is, will the American people continue to get the same credit that we got in the past during the Cold War, during the Civil Rights Movement, during the George W. Bush years, in comparison to the lack of credit the U.S. government got? Or is there a tide shifting where eventually the American people will be less and less welcome in these different countries because we're the people that don't take decisive action to save Syrian refugees, or we're the people, God, I hope not, but it could happen, that elect Donald Trump as our president? And that's going to be a very interesting thing in terms of, like, how do you judge these just we're talking about more than 300 million people, and then how is it that here comes, Sammy or Kenneth or Julia, and the reality of your existence, and you going to whatever country that you're in, and representing just different values than what you would think are the stereotypes. And so I come back to the same point of this is why citizen diplomacy is important, because it demolishes these stereotypes. And one of those stereotypes is the difference between the American people and the American government, but it nonetheless demolishes stereotypes by first-hand interaction with the real thing.
Yeah, and I do think there's definitely merit to those interactions on those. Or you go. Are you going?
Sure.
Or,
I just had a quick question because
yeah.
then I guess my question is, yes, I understand the emphasis on the locality, but then I guess what?
Can you speak up a little bit? It's hard to hear you.
Sure. So, in terms of I understand the aim, or at least like the emphasis on the locality, but then I guess I would be curious to hear what you have to say about maybe transcending past that, because it is ultimately like the bigger outlets of information and the grander scheme of things and the greater public audience that I guess should take most of our focus if we're going to try to, as you say, demolish these stereotypes and demolish these perspectives. Those kinds of things work if working at such a, I guess, less expansive demographic, then it will work. It's just a very, very, very gradual process. And how would you talk? I was just wondering if you could just talk a bit about bridging that gap between these like minor localities that you can change, but that won't have as much impact as accessing the greater, I guess, communicative network.
Yeah, look, I agree with you about the frustrations of the gradualism here and the tiny itsy bitsy piece by piece aspect of all this. But I don't think that there's a big bang component to any of this. And so, I mean, the reason why, for instance, we have you guys write these blog posts and then give presentations in your communities are because you're coming home to your communities and they know you, and that you can have a multiplier effect in that way. And if you guys write something that's convincing and very well written and poignant to the moment, then maybe we get you published in a place where 100,000 people read what you have to say and it has an impact. So we're always trying to aspire for that multiplier, and I'm using examples from domestic consumption here in the United States. But you could also say things about what you guys are doing on the ground there, that like when you're teaching a class, you got 20, 30 students in the class, then each one of those students, you have to look at them as hopefully this is a change agent from a perceptions perspective, that they go home and tell their parents, or they go home and tell, if they're adults, they tell their kids. It affects how they talk about the other. And the technology piece of the internet is intoxicating in terms of its potential. Oh, if we could just, get, 1 million people to retweet this message. Yeah, that would be amazing if that happened. But you also have to ask the question about the depth of that message, in terms of using technology. I personally, from my experience, and it's a very opinionated sort of thing, so other people can have other opinions. I think the value of having one of you in a community engaging with 20 to 30 people on a regular basis and forming relationships with them for a 6 to 8 week period is infinitely more impactful than a really well-written tweet or blog or essay, because you're the real thing, and they're getting the real picture, and they're getting, the smell, the taste, the sound, the full package, rather than just a very crafted, piece for them to consume and to feel as if they know something. So, Kenneth, I don't have a big bang answer for you. My answer is really, to empower change agents and to be focused on multiplying what you have to say on a people-to-people basis, rather than having it be like a virtual domino effect that all of a sudden changes the world. Because I don't think, you guys are all, critical thinkers, you're opinionated, you have thoughts about how the world should be. I don't think that if someone presented you with a really strongly written 800 or 2,000 word essay, that alone would convince you of something, but you would need to validate from firsthand experience. Am I wrong about that?
I guess depending on where.
I mean, it's possible, but I don't know. I think that you want to seek out your own evidence, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think of us would be here either if we didn't share part of that philosophy, because a lot of that is wanting to be there in person, wanting to see things in person, because it is an equal exchange to experience another culture. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and that was something else that you had mentioned in your comment, Julia, that it was on my mind, is that, okay, so one of the problems with citizen diplomacy as it's currently constructed is who has the access to be a citizen diplomat? What did it take for the three of you who are with us now?
I'm sorry, I can't really hear you.
Yes, I said, what does it take for you to become a citizen diplomat? Who has access to be able to go and do that? Like, I couldn't, drive down the street and just say, okay, everybody, get on the bus, we're going to Tajikistan, and you're going to go and be a citizen diplomat. There's a group of people that self-select into this, whether it's because of what their orientation towards the world already is and their curiosities, or what their either personal financial means are or their access to finances who are able to do this. And that reflects back on all the people who you were meeting. Kenneth, you talked about the people you're teaching in your classes. They all want to go somewhere. Are they going to be able to go somewhere? And so that's a flaw with this as well. And so, part of our agenda here was to talk about what are the traits or aspects of being an effective citizen diplomat. Part of the answer to that is representing viewpoints that are more than your own. So, it's fine and good to say, I'm for gun control, but if somebody asks you that question of why there's so many guns in America, you're doing an injustice to the field of citizen diplomacy if you only give your own opinion about the subject. If you give the full, if you paint the whole scope of the problem, and then you give your opinion about this is how it is, and this is my opinion on the subject, then what you're doing is you're representing a full spectrum of voices, and you're deciding to contribute your own voice to that argument. And so I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind for you guys as citizen diplomats, is who are all the people you're speaking for back home, whether you agree with them or not. And then when you come back home, who are all the Tajiks or the Moroccans you're going to speak for as you give your presentations and you are become an ambassador of them and of the experiences that you had.
Yeah.
What do you think? Go ahead.
So I think I talked about that in my reflection a little bit, but that's on my mind a lot because my work partner and we specifically have kind of a discussion every day before English class with this group of older Moroccan men, and so they have some more experience with American politics and that sort of thing, but they it's just really interesting because they Kenneth was saying, he's people want to come to America, they want to travel, they want to get out, and so they have this idolized version of America, there's nothing wrong, and I feel it's my duty to be okay, yeah, we do have progressive movements and we do have cool things that are happening, but there are also downsides. I told them about Michael Brown, because we were having this really interesting discussion about protesting in the U.S. versus protesting in Morocco, and they were telling me about this guy who graduated from school and he wanted a job, but the government couldn't get him a job, so he starved himself for 42 days. And some other person set themselves on fire. And I was like, that would never happen in the U.S. Somebody would take a video of some injustice and make it go viral. That's our form of protesting. And it was just really I just think it's really important to let people help them understand that there are both benefits and cons to America, and there's both benefits and cons to me, because I'm very open with my students about what's not let me dump my life story. But like there are problems with like everyone, and it's like I am just like you, you're just like me. We're both just kind of trying to make it in this world. So
Yeah, that's the point in terms of the complexities. Like, nothing is simple. You can't just say these people are good and these people are bad. These people work hard, these people don't. I mean, these people are imperialists and aggressors, and these people are victims and prey. So we've touched on your own experiences a bit, and we also talked about what it means to be an American citizen diplomat, and with more time we would have contrasted that a little bit. I want to just talk about point number 4 for a few minutes before we close, and this idea of what are the traits or aspects of being an effective citizen diplomat. Do you guys have things that jump to mind immediately about that?
yes.
Okay, go.
Like listening skills, like, and like being open-minded. I know that there's some people in my group who really struggle with like I don't know if they're like so ready just to like share like about themselves, or if they're I I think that the point of being a citizen diplomat is you want to listen to people, and like you have to remain like open to learning about them. And if you're like talking about them and you're like jumping ahead to like share about yourself, you're not going to learn anything about them,
Right.
And so I think that's a really, really important like skill or like trait to like possess, or at least practice. And like like I find myself some days like, okay, I have something I want to say about this. I want to contribute to this conversation, but it's like if I stop and just like listen and just like be quiet, like the Moroccans and like people and my students, they'll like fill it in, and I'll learn so much more as opposed to if I had jumped in.
Very good. That's on the list. It's in the chat box. Open engagement, listening, inviting questions, asking questions. Great. What else? Come on, Kenneth. Give me something. Wait a second. You guys ganged up. We can't hear you anymore. What happened? All of Tajikistan is mute. Okay, Sammy, what else?
All right. Another trait. I think being respectful. That's enough. I feel like that's like first and foremost. Like it's really funny walking around Morocco, and you can tell who the American tourists are because they've got their shorts on because it's so hot. But it's like just like having like prior knowledge and respecting of other people, and like I made the mistake the other day. It's like I was totally like oblivious and I didn't think about it, but I like tried to shake hands with my left hand the other day, and like the guy I tried to shake hands with, he like looked at me like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I am so sorry." I was just like I like apologized a lot, and I was like, "I'll never do it again." And like I like make a point now, like make sure everything's with my right hand. And it's just like, but if like I'd been like a little bit more like aware and respectful, then that wouldn't have happened. And like nothing bad happened, but it was just like being like aware of like the culture and where you're going, and like being aware of like the differences. It's really important.
Okay, that one, I like that one too. So I call that one tone. You say being respectful. This idea of how you do things is sometimes greater than what you actually, and more important than what it is that you actually do. So the way you carry yourself, smiling to a group of people that you have no language in common with, and you're sending out that message. Using your right hand instead of your left hand, not sticking the bottom of your shoe in somebody's face. Like sometimes, like filling those correct lanes are really important. Okay, you guys remember that old cartoon with the twins, like shape of, sound like, from the Justice League? Way before your time. Okay, the twins in Tajikistan. What do you have? We can't hear you. Still can't hear you. All right. Sammy, do you have another one? Or
Yeah,
you can type away while
yeah, they can fill in their own blanks. What else? What makes a good citizen diplomat?
I'll give you another one that well, Samuel, you formulate, which we just talked about, and that's having a credible voice.
Hmm.
That, explaining first and then offering your opinion. Providing concrete examples of what it is that you're talking about.
Hmm.
Not lying. And if you don't know something, saying, I don't know the answer to that, and let me find out about it, and being honest in that way. And one of the things that was been striking to me about reading the Morocco blog posts is in some of them, there's been this element of apologizing for America, like overly apologizing for America. And I think that that's important too, is there's things that one can express disagreement with, but also understanding that, like every place has its problems, like every place has its challenges. And I guess it's a personal opinion, but I don't think that America is any worse than any other place that I've been. Like, there are all these complicated things, and so when people come hat in hand and just apologize for everything the United States has done since 1776, then I think that it undercuts one's own message and credibility. Okay, something exciting seems to be happening in Dushanbe. What do you guys have? You typing? Okay. So, Sammy, what were you going to say?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I guess it kind of combines with like tone and credible voice. It's like you need like an attitude, like a good attitude. Have a sense of humor. That's really important. So it's like there's been so many awkward situations and I remember I'm sure many people have said it, but my language professors, they've been like, that you're fluent in a language if you're funny and you understand the humor. And I think like I'd like to like modify that as like you can connect with people if you have a sense of humor, like through languages. Like I think that like that's what helps people connect is like if you're funny and you can get like their sense of humor and like help them figure out like I'm just a human and I'm hilarious and stuff like that, then it forges those connections even stronger and like it leaves even more of an impact, which is like what you want to do. So
Yeah. So
I'm scraping the barrel. So
no, I mean, I recast what you were saying a little bit in letter E there. So it's the presentation of yourself, not taking yourself too seriously. Kenneth is adding into this as well in terms of the vivacity of what you bring to the workplace. And then also, like, so that's from like a spiritual, substantive perspective, but then also from a very superficial perspective that if Sammy, you've referred to the American women walking down the street in tank tops and short shorts. That you put that out as a visual, no matter how deep you are on the inside, that's going to be the lasting impression that people have. And so being conscious of what are the superficial things you're putting out there to the world. If you've got like 10 different facial piercings, then that's what people are going to take away from whatever interaction you have that, that superficiality, unfortunately. Kenneth says challenging seemingly insuperable barriers to capacity. Okay. I guess that's like, the willingness to swim against the tide. I think I had one more here, which was knowing yourself. Let me put that in there. What are your own limitations? What's going to cause you to lash out? What are your pressure points? What are the things that you want to communicate? And so if you want to be an effective citizen diplomat, you want people to come away with the idea that jazz in the United States is amazing, then you should go around talking about jazz and know that that's important to you and be prepared to have lots of conversations about Charlie Parker and John Coltrane. It's a very sort of specific thing. Like at different times in my life, I've wanted everybody to know about Pittsburgh. And I've talked about Pittsburgh ad nauseum to people. So couple of things for you to think about there. As I said at the beginning of class, like this is not a academic study, citizen diplomacy. People don't do PhDs in citizen diplomacy. This is a practitioner's type of thing, where regardless of what you're doing and who you are, you can be a citizen diplomat, and you can either do it really well or you can do it badly. All right, so don't immediately adhere to pre-existing structures, innovating gradients rather than. Right. This goes back to tone and respect. I think that last comment. So let me stop there, and we're over time, but let's spend a minute or two on just finishing up the class. This is our last group class session, and you guys each have 2 more blog posts to do. You have your final memo and your photo essay to do. Are there any questions about that process and what's ahead? I can give you dates as well if you'd like them, of when stuff is due.
Could you just email us the dates, please?
Yes. Everything for the course is due. The last date everything is due is July 27th, and I will email you the dates for each thing. I really recommend submitting a first draft of your memo. There's a date in here for when I want the first draft of the memo by. The memo is something that you guys can use as a professional writing sample for job applications in the future. And if you guys haven't noticed thus far, and Kenneth, I'm sorry I haven't gotten your blog post back to you yet, but I give you a lot of comments and a lot of feedback on your blog posts. And if you do the rough draft of the memo, I'll do the same thing with the memo and help you get it to a stronger place. But if you just give me the one draft at the end, I'm not going to give the same kind of comments or feedback because I'll just see it as a finished product and I'll just read it and that'll be it. So if you want to get that kind of input on your work, then do a rough draft for the memo. Okay? So, Sammy, I'm sorry that Rafi and Amber missed much of the class. We videotaped them though, so I can send it to them.
I'll update them.
And they can, I know you can update them if they don't want to watch. But great to see you guys. Is there anything else you want to talk about before